Is there a chance Kyle Dubas does not return as the Toronto Maple Leafs GM, and it might not even be his own choice? And is Mitch Marner the most likely member of the Leafs core forward to be traded this offseason? Plus, we have several updates around other NHL news, including several coaching vacancies, a lot about Senators' ownership, as well as the Arizona Coyotes. What other options are they exploring? Are they relocating? What's up in that scenario? We'll discuss that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to cover today. We'll get into the Leafs rumors. There's obviously a hot topic around the league right now as we wait for further clarity and answers from their organization on how they plan to move forward. But for right now, we have several other updates around a lot of different coaching vacancies and other important NHL news. So, for example, with the coaching vacancies we've seen around the NHL, the Columbus Blue Jackets, I know Elliotte Friedman and a few other insiders have reported they've looked at a variety of experienced and newer coaches. One of those is Mike Babcock. Babcock has been confirmed by insiders that he did interview, but Friedman says he does not see it being very likely that he is hired. Now, Peter Laviolette, on the other hand, apparently is very much in the mix, but it very well could go, as we mentioned before, to an internal candidate that they're already looking at. So we'll see what Columbus decides. Laviolette's also been linked to the New York Rangers gig. Also, that head coaching spot is open. I think they're looking at a variety of options and people as well. But Friedman has mentioned that Laviolette has been considered in the mix there as well. One name that we can now confirm 100% is not going to end up in the New York Rangers is Penguins coach Mike Sullivan. As we talked about before, there was some previous rumors speculating that he could end up leaving the Penguins to go to the Rangers. And at the end of the day, he would be like the dream candidate or the ideal person that Chris Drury would love to bring in. He is under a long-term contract with the Pittsburgh Penguins, very much involved with ownership and involved with the process here to bring in a new general manager and possible president of hockey operations. He's got quite a lot of clout, a lot of pull and power there in Pittsburgh. So, a long-term deal just doesn't make sense. But at one point, there was a lot of speculation that Kyle Dubas could leave Toronto, end up in Pittsburgh, and try to bring Sheldon Keefe with him, which would essentially give Sullivan the option to be out of work and go to the Rangers. That's 100% not happening. As we discussed in that video way back, it was a very unlikely scenario, but it was something that was spreading all over social media and in the rumor mill. But it's a very unlikely scenario at this point. The Washington Capitals, the two main names linked to the head coaching position there is Jeff Halpern. Of course, works with Tampa. Former Capital himself has links to the organization, as well as Spencer Carberry, Toronto Maple Leafs assistant coach, also who has connections and links back to that organization where he worked there previously as well before. So we'll see if either of those guys end up being the candidate who gets the job. Also, we're getting reports from a variety of insiders, including Kevin Weeks and a few other from Calgary media, that Mitch Love, who was the AHL coach for the Calgary Flames affiliate, the Calgary Wranglers, getting a lot of interest from around the league, including the open job with the Flames. Other teams are apparently reaching out as well. So wouldn't be shocking if Mitch Love ends up being a potential head coach in the Flames organization. And if he doesn't get that job, and he very well could end up on the radar for some of these other teams that we've talked about that are also looking for some options there. So I know some of these teams are kind of taking their time. We haven't heard much with the Anaheim Ducks open spot as well. I know Elliotte Friedman reported that it seems like things are slow moving there. Pat Verbeek, the GM, was over at the World Championships and just made it sound like they couldn't really get a lot of information on that situation yet, but it sounded like there was kind of slow moving. So we'll see on that one. When it comes to the Ottawa Senators and their ownership situation, we know that all of the binding bids were submitted a few days back. I know Sens fans are anxiously waiting to find out who gets, I guess you call it preferred bidder status, or who has first shot to close the deal and become the new owners of the franchise. It sounds like it's likely going to be into next week now before that news is released. I know at one point it sounded like it might be today, Thursday, Friday, but that's not likely at this point. I know Front Office Sports has been quite on top of this, as well as Bruce Garriock of the Ottawa Sun and TSN. All of a sudden, it's looking like next week. So we will see where it's a long weekend in Canada. I don't know if it'll be Monday. I wouldn't be shocked if it's into Tuesday or so, maybe further before we find out. The New Jersey Devils and Tom Fitzgerald, the GM, have confirmed that Lindy Ruff will indeed be back next season as head coach behind the bench of the Devils. Fitzgerald said that he's absolutely the right coach and right guy for the team, and that the younger players absolutely love him. So it makes you question, obviously, if Ruff is going to be there, which he deserves to be. He had a phenomenal season. That assistant coach, Andrew Brunette, who was brought in after, kind of being out of work later into the offseason last year, scrambling to find a job, at least to get to work somewheres. But you have to think that he was also brought in with, because I think there was some, I don't want to say doubt, but there were some who thought that Ruff might be out of a job this year if things didn't start well for New Jersey. If you remember early in the season, a lot of fans were chanting to fire Lindy. Obviously, after a few losses to start the year, things quickly turned around, and the rest is history. They had a phenomenal season, but Brunette was certainly there, I think, as insurance, as a capable head coach who could take over, and somebody who they'd maybe seen as being the next head coach when it was time. And if it's not time, and they're going to give Ruff a contract extension, I'd expect Brunette to be in the mix for other teams. I'm sure he'd like to get back to being a head coach as soon as possible. Now, the Arizona Coyotes, we've talked about them a few times here in recent videos. Of course, we had the big breaking news the other night that the vote at the Tempe arena deal had failed, and the vote was no. Between 56 and 57% of residents that did vote opted to go against that and not approve the arena project and entertainment district. So obviously that left a lot of people in the Arizona Coyotes organization kind of stunned and wondering what's next. And like I said, the Coyotes president spoke, Xavier Gutierrez, and at the end of the day, it seemed like they didn't really know what was next. And now there's information today saying they're looking at a variety of sites and other spots to see if they can figure out another plan for an arena deal. Craig Morgan of Phoenix Sports, who has really been the main reporter all over this, and really for any Coyotes news, he's kind of like the go-to person that I look to for information, at least I know that way for a lot of people. Really, after the vote was no, he put out a couple of articles and obviously was online talking plenty about it. And really, it seemed like he was pretty much at a point where he was like this, like convinced himself that this was it, that there was no other options, and that they were likely going to have to relocate. That if you look at all the other scenarios that have been previously discussed that they could try to fall back on, that there was flaws and problems with all of them. Now, the next day, between yesterday and today, now he's saying, pump the brakes. The relocation talk should slow down. I mean, the Coyotes themselves have put out a statement and confirmed that they're going to be playing at Mullet Arena next year. So at this point, that's their plan, is that they're not leaving town. I mean, they do have the arena deal at ASU to play for a couple more years if they needed to. But I mean, the whole reason that was put in place, and I think the reason why the NHL and all the other owners were okay with it, was it wasn't supposed to be too long-term, and they'll put up with it on a longer-term basis as long as there's a plan in the other arenas that's actually being built and developed. But with now, you take away, look at all the amount of time that went into planning that Tempe project for it to fail. And that was a lot of time. Is the NHL going to have the patience to go start from scratch and go all through this all over again? Like, they went through several scenarios. But one thing that was mentioned today is apparently they're looking at an old mall site called the Fiesta Mall in Mesa. And that's the site they're looking at. I don't know. But again, even if they think that site can work, it's going to have to go to a public vote yet again. The way they have their laws and everything structured down there is you can't build anything of this large magnitude without the public voting in a referendum type of style election. So at the end of the day, if the people rejected the other one, now I know it's not all exact same people, obviously, but still, you have to think that the odds are against them. But, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But Elliot Friedman's also said in his radio hit today with Jeff Merrick on the Jeff Merrick Show that he's hearing that a lot of the other teams around the NHL are getting quite frustrated by this and kind of want this to come to an end. A lot of the players on the team are frustrated. We've seen like we talked about in the last video, about the tweet from Clayton Keller's dad, which has now been deleted, but has been confirmed that it was legit him that put it out, saying that Clayton Keller is not going to be there at the start of the season. Several other players are going to do the same. They're going to want out, and that they're going to regret not, voting yes for this arena deal, and they're going to regret losing a sports franchise. And that was done. They had to move. So at the end of the day, a lot of people are frustrated by this, and the Coyotes I understand they feel like they need to come out and say they're committed to trying to make it work in the Erie, which I'm surprised we didn't hear on the first night when the vote first happened. That didn't come until the next day. What options do they really have that are viable? And even if they figure one out, think about the amount of time that's going to take. Is the NHL going to be able to have the patience to deal with this? Because no matter what Gary Bettman thinks, he works for the owners. And if enough of the other owners are restless and getting tired of cutting checks to this team that are obviously not generating their share of the revenue, especially due to the fact, I mean, for one, the team has struggled for years and already struggled with generating revenue. And then you factor in the fact that they're at that college arena with the really small seating capacity, so they're going to struggle for a number of years more. Obviously that's frustrating for them. So they're clearly not going to want to put up with this for much longer. And then you throw in the players. Now, I realize the players can't all go say, trade me, I want out. They can. The team doesn't necessarily have to. But things could get ugly. And as Friedman mentioned, there's going to be likely to be pressure from the NHLPA as well. And I don't know, I guess you could say that the main summary here is that the Coyotes team say it's not over. We're looking at sites, looking at them all site. I don't know. It just seems like there's already everybody's saying that they're going to have to relocate. But yet the locals are saying it's not over. Friedman mentioned that, for example, look at the Oakland A's baseball team right now. We know that they're playing their final season there and they're moving, I believe, to Vegas. And nobody's going to the games, right? So I guess if they came out and said this is going to be our final season where we have to move, that, what they are generating is going to probably plummet even further, and they don't want to do that. So I don't know. I do legit think that they are trying to explore these options, but I just don't know that there's really an option there that hasn't been already explored over and over again that legit has a shot to work and be a long-term solution that's going to make this team profitable, because they've been bleeding money for eons. I mean, how much more money can this team lose? It's just crazy. Anyway, so we'll see where things go. But for right now, they're playing at least one more season and they're looking at sites. We'll see if they can figure out something. Although I honestly think the odds are very much against them. Now on to the Maple Leafs rumors. I want to take a look at a Chris Johnston hit that he did on a Steve Dangle podcast, which he does every year. At the basically after Lawford cleanout day, he always goes on and talks with the guys about everything he heard and what he knows after being down in the arena and being a part of the Lawford cleanout, and what to expect in the offseason, so to speak. And essentially, we get some pretty big information, CJ, on this podcast hit. So essentially, he says that he believes that an extension for Kyle Dubas was being worked on even before the playoffs started. Once the Tampa series was completed and they were wrapped up in one, it kind of sealed the deal that it was definitely coming and to be an offer on the table. And he says that the Kyle Dubas press conference, where he spoke to the media back at the beginning of this week, that it kind of changed everything. And it was completely like Kyle Dubas going out there, going off script and dropping a bomb that nobody in upper management was expecting when it comes to Brendan Shanahan. The owners or anybody that works closely with Kyle Dubas was not expecting him to come out and say that this has been a very taxing year in his family, and that he might need to take some time and talk to them before he could really say what his future holds and all that. And he said that he kind of wonders now, are MLSE even having second thoughts about signing him? Are they concerned that he may not be all in? Is his head really into it? Can he really commit to this job? It's a tough market to work in for sure. Mostly having some second thoughts about him continuing on with this job, which is certainly understandable for sure. But that press conference, he said, this completely blew everybody away and just caught everybody off guard. It was like a bomb going off, essentially, to kind of throw everything for a loop. Now, essentially, MLSE is in a holding pattern, waiting to hear from Dubas what his decision is. And, CJ said he was under the impression that we'd probably find out Tuesday, maybe Wednesday. Well, we're already Thursday. There's still nothing. As I record this video, nothing's come out. Could it be tomorrow into the long weekend? Who knows? But obviously, MLSC is only going to wait so long as they need to have confirmation of who's going to be running this team and start making plans for the offseason. It's just that simple. There's a lot to do. So does Dubas want to return? We know that there's a chance he might not on his own decision. And if his own decision takes too long, or based on what he had to say, created any doubt in his boss's mind, it's possible that he may not be back because of their decision. So this is certainly taking a wild turn here, and we'll have to see where this goes. Hopefully we'll get some clarity on the situation soon. I can't imagine it's going to take too long because at the end of the day, like I said, the Leafs need to move on with some important business here, and they need to know who's going to be in charge of that. But they also admitted as well that there's definitely tension between Dubas and Shanahan. For sure, things were very different this year. When they're at the games, they were always seen the last year and previously in the box together, watching the game, talking throughout. That wasn't the case this year, and he certainly doesn't know the full ins and outs of it all, but certainly it seemed like there was definitely a bit of you either want to call it a power struggle or just a change in the relationship that just certainly looked to be quite different, and definitely some tension. But he said there were plenty of times when he was there observing practice and things when he'd see them talking and they looked kind of normal, but then plenty of other times when they were not. And he said Brendan Shanahan doesn't do things by accident, and for him to not be there all the time, especially in important games, just seemed kind of odd, and he wonders what was up with that, and the fact that Shanahan wasn't there to speak with Dubas because they've always done it together, and we haven't heard from him yet, leads us to think there's certainly a lot of question marks around decisions that Shanahan probably wants to wait and speak once they know for sure what's going on with their GM and head coach and make all those decisions going forth before he speaks, and I can kind of outline everything all at once. Now, when it comes to the players, of course, he went through, like he always does, they went through the entire roster, looked at who he felt would be returning and who would likely be moving on. Went through a lot of players that he feels is not going to be back. Most players that are on expiring contracts that are UFAs, and they have a lot of them, are, according to CJ, very likely to not return. Now, he did say Justin Hall not coming back, Ryan O'Reilly not coming back. He doesn't feel like O'Reilly really, like he said, basically what he said about O'Reilly was that he loved the opportunity to play with this hometown team his parents like cheering for and the grandma, but it was just a short-term thing. He's not going to take a discount on this contract, and obviously the Leafs wouldn't be able to offer him a lot of money as much as they might like to keep him. They're not going to be able to afford much, so he doesn't see that working out. Alex Kerfoot's another name he figures is very much likely gone. He said Michael Bunting very much likely gone because they're going to all get more money on the open market than Toronto can offer. Wayne Simmons won't be back. That's not surprising. Zach Aston-Reese, he said he's very likely not coming back. Eric Gustafsson not coming back. No surprise there. David Kampf, he said he didn't think so either, but some other insiders have said that they felt Kampf might be the most likely of all of those guys. But at this point, CJ doesn't think it's a good possibility. He also mentions that Matt Murray won't be back, won't be a Leaf next year. One way or another, he won't be there. So they're either going to have to buy him out, which seems less likely, or add an asset or some kind of incentive and trade him to another team. Doesn't see them putting him on LTIR because at this point he's considered healthy because he was able to back up and be available as the number 3 guy in the playoffs as well. Then when Samson got hurt, he was the backup. So at the end of the day, he's healthy. So if he's healthy, then goes into the offseason healthy, then they're not going to LTIR because unless something else happened, which we can't predict. So he still doesn't think Murray's back next year. Going through the core 4 players, though, he says Tavares will be back. He's got a no-move clause, and he's not going anywhere, so he's not interested in waiving it. Austin Matthews, he says, will be back. He said Matthews is a player that they really wouldn't want to trade. They want to extend, and he seems very legit interested in extending. Again, like a lot of the other insiders have confirmed, doesn't sound like Matthews' first interest or first preference would be to sign long term. Probably looking at a 4-year deal again, maybe 5 at most. So he can kind of get another deal when he's 30, 31, which makes sense because that's probably when he's going to look for the 8-year deal, which you take him near retiring. And he's obviously the older you are is when you're more likely to get the longer term deal and cash in one more big time. So he can cash in twice with raising salary cap values. So makes sense from a financial perspective for him. But he thinks Tavares and Matthews will be back. The trade that we're most likely to see, he said that he feels like it's almost a guarantee, as closest to a guarantee as you can get, that the core 4 will not all be back, and that he feels Mitch Marner is the most likely player to be traded. He says that he feels Marner more likely than Nylander would go. Combination of the fact that they get more value, combination of the fact that they feel like he said he thinks Mitch Marner would probably do better in a different market, that obviously the pressure gets to him, and that it might do him good, and it might be, even though he might not like it at the time, might be the best thing ever for him to play in a different market, and I completely understand where he's coming from. I've said it before as well. I think the pressure from having his family there and being the hometown kid. I think it gets to him. When it gets to he has phenomenal regular season, but when the pressure is on, he always seems to buckle. And this is not like it's been 1 or even 2 years. This is a long stretch now. These guys have been together. We're talking 6, 7 consecutive years of playoff blunders. Like at some point, you have to say, okay, we've done this enough times. At some point, we got to make a change. Now, it doesn't mean that Marner's going to be traded, because you got to remember they need a player back that's going to justify them making this kind of trade, and that might be very difficult to do. So they're going to probably Johnson said essentially that. Now, if Dubas isn't back, though, it could throw a complete monkey wrench into the return of Austin Matthews. Will Matthews still want to stay and see the vision of a new GM? That could complicate things. In the case of Marner, they absolutely, what he said is they would need a star player back. So, obviously, Dubas referenced the blockbuster deal between the Panthers and the Calgary Flames, and essentially that, they'd be open to anything. He said that whatever is going to make them better and have a better chance at the Stanley Cup is what he would be open to doing. So there is an article on Sports Stuff from Luke Fox, which I took a look at. It went through a bunch of Marner potential trade partners, and I even added a couple myself here just to see. But, for example, on the one that was mentioned by Jeff Merrick, which they reference here in this article, is the Colorado Avalanche. With Landeskog being out long-term and not going to play next year, they have lots of extra salary cap space. There's the uncertainty around Valeri Nichushkin. So that would make sense. Now, what would the trade package look like? Clearly, that trade package would include more than just one player, but likely one of their top young defensemen, so either Samuel Girard or Bo Byram. They would have to have one of them in there, and you're looking at something else. I'm not sure what the something else would be. The problem with that trade is they could certainly upgrade things in the back end with another really good skating, puck-moving defenseman, which would be great for their top 4D. But they're not going to get a star forward in return. Now, they could maybe get a good forward, and maybe that will be like an Alex Newhook or something along those lines, but they're not going to trade McKinnon or Rantanen. That for sure. So, and Landeskog's obviously injured. So you take those 3 names off the list here, you look at what else they'd have to offer, unless the Nichushkin's maybe considered part of it once things get cleared up on that front. I don't know. But they could get a potential package there. But that's what it would look like. I don't know. It makes a lot of sense for Colorado. Don't know. It makes a ton of sense for the Leafs. It depends on what's coming back, but I just don't know that they have the right piece there. That mentioned the Calgary Flames, who of course didn't have a great season, and obviously, are looking to make some moves. Elias Lindholm would likely be the main player coming back, former 40-goal scoring centerman, who can also play on the wing. So, do they build a package around Lindholm? They could probably put a defenseman in there as well. They have more than enough of them. They can get a good puck-moving defenseman. And Lindholm, there have to be other pieces. Now, keep in mind here, I don't want these all torn to shreds because they're not all my idea, for one. And number two, this is just the key pieces involved, not the full package. I understand Marner's going to be a very valuable commodity, and it was going to take more than just some of the things we're talking about here. So, Lindholm and a defenseman, whether it be Hanifin or Tanev or one of those guys maybe, that's a potential one. The Washington Capitals and Tom Wilson. He's 29 years old, going to need a new contract as soon himself. Could that be an attractive option? Obviously, he would be a game changer, but he's hitting that age when players typically start to regress. That seems risky to me, but that was mentioned in the article. I don't know if that's really a good idea. I know one I thought of maybe would be Vancouver and JT Miller. Now, Miller's also older than Marner. I think they would probably prefer a player that's similar age to Marner or younger. That would be ideal. Miller, obviously a bit older, but comes with a long-term contract, and is certainly that player who can play a little bit nastier, play a little bit more aggressive. It might be the type of player that they would like to add in that top 6. I don't know that ideally he would be the guy that they would want. Of course, a lot of teams might not trade for Mitch Marner unless they know that he's going to want to stay and re-sign as well, because he's only got 2 years on his contract. So that's risky for some teams to do for sure. Would Vancouver have interest? Would the Leafs have interest in Miller? I don't know. I'm not really sure. It's not perfect. Like I said, Miller is the kind of player, but when you look around the NHL, you look at players that would kind of fall into that, killer instinct, power forward, aggressive type forward that can really drag your team into and really provide that element that they're missing. There's not a lot of them around the NHL. So this kind of deal is going to be hard and tough for them to do. And that's why it's not a given that they actually end up doing it. The Devils are another one. They may have to trade Jesper Bratt or Timo Meier. Could they be a match there? But then again, they're trading one of those guys because they may not be able to fit them both under the cap. So taking on Marner's contract would be a challenge. So again, as much as the players on the Devils that might be available would be interesting, I don't think that really works great either. The Rangers are another team that's mentioned. Maybe it's a combination coming back. Philip Hedl and K'Andre Miller. So some younger assets that might be able to help. But again, I don't know. Like, you know, if you're trying to think of like the who we're doing for Tkachuk trade, if you're trying to think of a player who can play a style similar to Tkachuk, there's not much out there. So it's tough to do. But the Rangers, you know, whether even Hedl or Lafreniere, there's been some rumors about Lafreniere and Kako, maybe one of the two being available, along with a young defenseman. Would that be? But I mean, how do the Rangers squeeze that under the cap? They already have Panarin. Do they need Marner? Again, not a perfect trade, so it's complicated, right? Philadelphia was mentioned. Apparently, the Leafs have been high on Travis Konecny, according to some sources, for some time. Would a package of Travis Konecny, Cam York, and maybe a draft pick be enough to get Marner? Do you imagine Mitch Marner playing for John Tortorella? I don't. I think that would be a huge disaster. I don't see that happening. You know, the Blue Jackets were heavily interested before in Marner when he was negotiating his last contract. There was a rumor that they did issue an offer sheet to him, even though he didn't accept. So again, is that something that they would revisit? Do they still have that interest? But what would they offer? I was looking at their roster, what they could offer. Like, they're not going to offer up like Patrick Laine or something like that. I don't know that they really have what the Leafs would want. Again, this is really tough trade. So the Jets are another team, not mentioned in this article, but I thought because we know their team is going to be going under extensive changes. So, you know, you're looking at Dubois, Scheifele, Wheeler, all some combination of those guys maybe being available. But again, is that going to work out? I don't think so. Dubois is rumored to want to go to Montreal. If he goes to Toronto, it'd probably only be for a year. Is he going to put his heart into it? I'd be skeptical of making that move. Scheifele's obviously a little bit older. You know, I don't think Winnipeg would really prefer to trade Nick Ehlers or Kyle Connor, but that's probably the player that the Leafs would prefer to target if they're going to do that kind of deal, and it would have to probably be that plus something else. Again, I don't know if that works out. San Jose, Erik Karlsson, at least they both make similar type money. Is that a possibility? I mean, they take from the forward group, but they get one of the game's most dynamic defensemen. Again, not a perfect trade because I really think they need to add to that forward group to have the offensive punch. Because if you take a look at what this team lacked in this year's playoffs, it was offense. Because their offensive players dried up. They could not play that playoff style of game against the teams they were facing. It's just that simple. So they need a different mix in the forward group. So to get back a top defenseman, sure, that's a great idea in a sense. But then you're going to have Karlsson and Riley sharing ice time. I don't know. I don't know if you really need two players like that on the back end. So as much as it's a fun thought, is it perfect? No, it really isn't. I mean, Logan Couture, the captain of the Sharks, could be another player they look at. Again, a guy who could produce, certainly play a different style for sure. Good leader, been the captain there for a while. But he's older. I think he's like 34. He has like $8 million on his contract for another, I think, 4 years. So the money works, but do you really want to trade Marner, who's 26, for a 34-year-old? Not really. I guess if you win the cup in the next year or two, maybe it's okay, but I don't know. This team is really risky. So looking through this article, looking through the league, this is going to be a really, really tough trade for the Leafs to pull off, to find that Tkachuk type of trade, because all teams could use that type of player. Like I said, that's a supply and demand issue. There's just not many of them. I don't know where they're going to find the right deal to make this work. So as much as we want to talk about the core four being broken up and everybody thinks it needs to happen and the insiders are saying the Leafs feel like they need to do it, everybody can feel that way and it could be a legit thing. It doesn't mean it's going to happen because finding that right deal, to me, sounds really, really, really challenging. And as much as I think they should do it too, I think that may not happen because of the lack of options on the market. So let me know what you think. Is there a trade out there that makes sense for Mitch Marner that the Leafs could actually benefit from and have a better chance of winning a Stanley Cup? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.